Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. It is Eagles week for the New York Giants, which you can probably tell because my guest for the day is in green today, of course. I made absolutely sure not to be in green today, but anyway, I am joined by Brandon Lee Gowton of the SB Nation website, the fantastic SB Nation website, Bleeding Green Nation. So, Brandon, welcome to the show, and how you doing?
Ed, thanks for having me. Glad to be here with you once again to preview a game where there's a pretty obvious storyline that I'm sure we'll be talking about at some point.
I gotta research that storyline. I'm not sure what it is that I'm not sure what it is that you're talking about. Does it have something to do with a running back?
Yeah, that's what the rumors are saying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's we've got to talk about that running back. You and I traded 5 questions this week, and I hope folks at your site and my site have read those. And obviously Saquon Barkley was a big topic of conversation. In both of those, he's been a big topic of stories at Big Blue View all week. His return to MetLife Stadium for the first time and all of that. And I guess my question for Giants fans, because we did our SB Nation Reacts poll on that this week, and I'm waiting to see the results of that. The thing that I wonder about more than anything is how he's going to be received at MetLife Stadium. I will guess that it's going to be mixed because I know how many Eagles fans are going to be there. But I am very curious to see how Giants fans react to Saquon Barkley. What's your guess?
Well, he thinks apparently in an interview with ESPN that he is not going to be booed, and
He's
brought up.
wrong.
Yeah, I
He's
agree.
wrong. He
I'm
will
very.
be booed by at least some people.
I think there will be a lot of boos, and I think that's fine. There should be. He plays for the Eagles now. I
Hmm.
know you can say like, "Oh, it wasn't his fault." The Giants didn't offer him money, whatever. That doesn't matter. Like fans are allowed to not like that a player that they did like at one time is now on a team that they don't like at all. And in fact, more than that, is a big rival. So I think you're allowed to boo Saquon as a Giants fan, and also you don't have to hate him necessarily to do that.
No.
It's harmless. Booing, it's just a noise. It's really not that big of a deal. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Just I
So
I
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, he comes out on the field, people get it out of their system, let it go, and then it becomes nothing.
mm,
Unless he goes and runs for 200 yards, in which case social media is going to be just absolutely shredding Joe Shane, who will be, curled up in a corner sucking his thumb probably at that point. But but I want to say this before I actually ask you, about. I know Saquon's having a good year,
mhm.
but and we'll talk about his impact on the Eagles. But I want to say this, and maybe you can react to this as well. It's funny. I was at Quest Diagnostics for practice on Wednesday, and I was talking with one of the other media members about Saquon. And I said, look at the production from Giants running backs. You knew it was going to take two guys because Devin Singletary's not the workhorse that Saquon is.
Mhm.
The production from the Giants running backs, if you count pass receiving, the production from Giants running backs is virtually equal
Mhm.
to what Saquon has given the Eagles. And I said, really, the Giants are 2-4. And I said, not having Saquon has made zero difference. It hasn't mattered at all because the unit the Giants tried to fix has been better with that money. And they weren't a good offense anyway. So it just hasn't made much difference. Um, I'm curious about your reaction to that. and then go ahead and talk about his impact in Philly.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like love the Saquon Barkley signing for the Eagles originally because I thought that you don't really need to pay this kind of big time running back money to get good production. In fact, the Eagles have kind of really been big examples of that. They won the
Hmm.
Super Bowl with paying like nobody, and for this,
Right.
and they went back to another one, same kind of deal. Weren't really paying any kind of big running back investment at all. They spent a second round pick on Miles Sanders, funny enough, who succeeded Saquon Barkley at Penn State. But that was like what 53 or something. So whatever. Um, so yeah, I didn't love the signing originally for the Eagles just from a resource standpoint. And not that I thought Saquon was a bad player. I just thought you're paying a premium kind of here for a player at a position that's just there's replaceable, or you can get a lot of fungible is the word. So I think for the case of the Giants, I think it is reasonable that they wouldn't pay him, especially with where they are kind of contention wise. If the Giants were kind of pushing their chips all in, then yeah, I think that would have been kind of like a much more questionable decision of why didn't you just pay this guy who is a homegrown player and fan favorite and you're trying to win anyway. And that maybe, puts you over the top. I think it's okay for the Giants not to pay him. Although I think, seeing the process a little bit on Hard Knocks and everything, it seems to me like maybe they could have had a better avenue to like keeping the door open there, just from a standpoint of I think Saquon like didn't get paid as much money as like everyone thought he originally. I mean, it's a 3-year deal, which is probably really just like a 2-year deal with guarantees and everything. And I think that's something the Giants probably, could have been a little contract, sure. So from that standpoint, I think the Giants, made an okay decision, although it is certainly, I feel like, probably frustrating. At least John Mara said it'd be a nightmare for him to see Saquon end up in Philadelphia, where he's been awesome. Um,
Mhm.
there's been some mistakes for sure. I'm not really worried about those being big issues moving forward. Like that drop at the end of the Falcons game, I'm pretty sure he's going to make that play like 9 times out of 10 moving forward, if not all. Um, and there was a sequence in this Browns game where he ran out of bounds when he didn't really have to. On the second one, he could have turned upfield. Then he kind of misses a blitz pickup. Eagles end up having a field goal blocked. It's a 10-point swing. That's a big sequence, but I'm not really worried about him doing that again if that situation arises. But I mean, the positive, week 1, 3 touchdowns, electric, contributing as a runner, as a pass catcher, in pass protection, runs hard. I mean, I don't need to, you already know what
No,
Saquon can
we
do.
know what he is, and it's just interesting because I said right from the beginning that I thought the Giants were correct philosophically in moving on from Saquon because of the age, because of the mileage and the injuries, and because of where they were. It just didn't make sense to give big money, a big money contract
Hmm.
to a running back that's got 6 or 7 years of mileage on his legs. And the flip side of that was the Eagles, the Ravens, those kinds of teams that were looking for a finishing piece. Those were the right teams to go after him. Whoever, any of those teams expecting to be in the final four,
Hmm.
come playoff time, per se, would have been the right kinds of teams to go after him. So somehow I'm not surprised he wound up in Philly.
I mean, I didn't think they would invest such, again, big resources just looking at their history. But I think it kind of
Hmm.
just came to a point where it almost became like a market inefficiency a little bit, where it's like, well, actually, this running back money isn't really that different than the contract people bring up a lot. It's like what the Falcons paid to get Darnell Mooney, and it's like, well, who
Hmm.
would you rather have? Not that I like Darnell Mooney. I think Mooney's a good player, but still, like, especially for what the fits the Eagles too, and the fact
Hmm.
that it was a unique kind of opportunity. And again, it's really only like a 2-year kind of commitment, so you're not really worried about this thing blowing up in a huge way, even if things kind of go sideways a little bit at some point.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, and again, I think he's been even better than like the people who were high in the move could have reasonably expected. He's been, making huge plays. The play he had in the Saints game really stands out where The Eagles enter that game without A.J. Brown. Devontae Smith, unlike the play before, I think it was, goes down, gets hit late, concussion. They're basically, they're not left with much at that point when you're missing A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And Saquon kind of like responded in a huge way, breaks off a big run, like kind of really put the team on his back. I feel like he was like trying extra hard on that next play, knowing that the team needed him to step up in a really big moment. They ended up winning that game. He sparks the offense with that. So yeah, there's definitely been like really big value here early on. And honestly, the Eagles have, used him quite a bit, but like they should be feeding him more because like until someone stops him, I mean, I would just keep riding him.
Yeah, I know. Dexter Lawrence said the other day, and we'll see how this all plays out. But I'm anxious to see it. You know, Dexter Lawrence said that he wanted Saquon to feel him a little bit on Sunday. So we'll see how that all works out. There's 360 pounds of Dexter, so we'll see. When you feel Dexter, you really feel Dexter. But let's talk a little bit about some other Eagles topics, Brandon. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that this team, and we talked about this a little bit in our 5 questions as well. This team doesn't seem right. 2 years ago, this team's in the Super Bowl, and I'm looking at this team thinking, oh, they just gave Jalen Hurts this massive contract. They've got all these young players. They've got all these young receivers. They've got this defense with so many players on it that they can't get some of them on the field. This team is set up to dominate the NFC for the next 5 or 6 years. And that's not happening. What's going on?
Great question. I would like to know that too. So obviously, they have the collapse last year. That's kind of like really where we go back in time. And that collapse, in hindsight especially, was always going to happen because even though the Eagles were 10-1, they weren't good in point differential. They weren't winning convincingly. No one was happy. In fact, there was a report that came out last year describing the Eagles as like the most miserable 10-1 team ever. The way the vibe was in the locker room. And I think part of that is, the crushing weight of expectations. You just went to the Super Bowl. You just came off your best season in franchise history in terms of like they won 14 games. That was a new high. Obviously, you have the 17th game, but really just the way they played, like in 2022, they didn't really face much adversity or resistance. They were just so much better than every other team for the most part. And then they played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. But a game that was ultimately decided by 3 points. The game was close. Mm-hmm. They had a 10-point lead going into half. So, weren't too far away. But obviously the NFL isn't designed for teams at the top typically to stay at the top more often than not. You lose both coordinators. You lose a bunch of free agents. You're worse off. Jalen Hurts, some level of regression there. His turnovers certainly go up a lot from where they were in 2022 when he had 9 and 18 games. And now he has 23 in his last 28 games or so, dating back to the start of 2023. I think we've seen the coaching clearly from Nick Sirianni. I think that's a big issue in terms of where in 2022 they had all that talent. I don't think the coaching, which was good, to be fair, I just don't think it mattered as much where you lose that talent gap. And now it's more pressure on the coaching staff to give you an edge in some respect. And I think we've really failed to see that from Nick Sirianni. I think we failed to see just how he contributes, what he really gives this team. The Eagles obviously can win with him. He has a great record. And I think they can win in spite of him. And I think they have won in spite of him.
He keeps them in the headlines, Brent. He keeps them in the headlines.
Not for good reasons, though, at least after this game.
I find it interesting because I do a mailbag, every week. And one of the questions I got this week was, and everybody likes to gnash their teeth about, and we've been arguing about Daniel Jones for so many years. And
so many years now.
The question I get this week is, are the Giants a good quarterback away from being a great team? And it's not that simple. If Daniel Jones was consistently a good quarterback, and he's had some good games this year, they would be better. Okay. If he played consistently at the top end of his ability, they would be better and they would win more games. But my point is, there are a lot of fans out there who want to simply make the Giants' inability to sort of get over that hump and win more games. They want to just blame that on Daniel Jones. It's a Daniel Jones problem. If we had a different quarterback, we'd be better. We'd be in the playoffs. Is it an oversimplification with the Eagles to say what the Eagles really have is a Nick Sirianni problem?
I think that's where you have to start because it's the easiest thing to replace, right? Like Jalen Hurts got paid a ton of money. And even if he is the biggest problem, which I don't think he is ultimately big picture, like you're not getting rid of it. So you can change the coach at least first and see if that helps at all. And obviously if that doesn't, then you can look at the quarterback. So yeah, my thing on Sirianni is that I thought the Eagles should have fired him after the collapse last season. And I think everyone saying why you couldn't do that was like, oh, but he has such a good record coming off the Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. What he's done in the past is not necessarily indicative of what he's going to do in the future. And I think anyone who really defends Nick Sirianni, which there really isn't a lot of that, Ed, that's not really happening anywhere. I think those people will struggle to tell you what specifically he contributes to winning. I think the biggest thing I can give him credit for, to try to be fair and argue for him in this case, is the culture in the past. I think the Eagles have had good vibes. The energy has been good. Team camaraderie, all that. And obviously players deserve some credit for that. But that really hasn't existed, I think, for some time now, especially during the collapse. And he doesn't seem to have any answers. That's my biggest issue, like from a big picture kind of thing. What does he do? Because he doesn't call plays. The game management isn't good. There's famously been issues with that in multiple games this year, almost every game. He's not giving you any kind of like schematic advantage. It's hard to. There's a big question of like, what does Nick Sirianni even do? My question is, what does Nick Sirianni do well? And I struggle to come up with that. So I think generally, as a kind of like a step outside of the Sirianni conversation a little bit, I think coaches tend to get like too much blame, in part because they're the easy target. No one is buying, like, there's no jersey of the head coach. Everyone's buying the jerseys of the players. Like, they love the players. You don't want to criticize your favorite player. The coach, who cares? They're just gonna that guy is replaceable. It's easy to criticize that guy. So that being said, though, I do think Sirianni is a case where the criticism is actually warranted, and he's not, again, at a very simple level. Like I said, like he doesn't have answers. These very simple things doesn't give the team an edge. I also think he doesn't do more with less, which I think is what the best coaches do. They take less talent. And I think just for example, you could look at like Mike Tomlin doing this for years with the Steelers, trotting out like Drek at quarterback, and yet never having a losing record, somehow finding a way to maximize the talent that he's got. I think that's what good coaching is. And I don't think Nick Sirianni gets more out of less. I think he gets less out of more.
And I don't know. I also think part of being the head coach of a franchise and part of being good at being the head coach of a franchise is you're the front-facing, most often quoted, most often talked about, really. You're the person talking to the media all the time. You're the front-facing voice of the organization. That is something Nick Sirianni is not good at, period. He's just not good in that role. He hasn't been since the day they hired him. And I don't know. I mean, to me, that's part of the role. And if you're not good at it, that's problematic.
Yeah. I mean, can't be yelling at the fans. Like, just don't do that. You won the game.
Yeah. Don't do that.
And also, you won by 4 points against the Cleveland Browns, which you entered the game as like 9.5-point favorites. So I just don't understand how you would possibly think like that's the time to really go off and really rub it in the fans' faces, even if there was a proper time to do it. I don't think it's then. So
especially since probably a lot of those fans you were yelling at had money on the game that you just cost them.
I didn't think of it that way. That is a fair point.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Hey, let's talk about a couple of other things. You mentioned Jalen Hurts,
Hmm.
the big contract, all of that. Um, has there been regression with Hurts, or is it just symptomatic of team wide, or is is this more of what he is? I mean, so I guess it's was 2 years ago an aberration, or just what's the deal with him overall?
Yeah, I mean, the turnovers are the place to start. Just like I said, he is the most in the NFL since the start of last season. It's too many. And this year, other than last week against the Browns, where he did not turn the ball over, and maybe that's a start of positive things for him to come. We'll see. But like that has to stop. Like, it's not really like high level analysis, but it just has to stop. And more so than I would say than other quarterbacks at the top of that list too, who players who rank below him aren't Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, obviously good players. But the difference there is like those guys have to carry the weight of their offense. They don't have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Saquon Barkley and Dallas Goddard. Like sometimes Jalen Hurts is going to have to step up and make a play on his own. Yeah, there's going to be times and places for that, but it can't be like what the offense is, how the bread and butter of it, and like the identity of the offense. Sometimes Jalen Hurts has to just not make the big mistakes and make the plays that are there for him to make and not force it. So, and in case in point, that was the case in the Browns game. So you have to see the turnovers come down. There's just been way too many, and we can talk about things outside of that. Like there's a lot of discussion in Philly. Whose offense is this really? Because Nick Sirianni is the head coach, yes, but he was kind of taken out of the offensive power after last year, and it's
Mhm.
supposed to be Kellen Moore's offense. That's why the Eagles hired him. He's calling the plays. He's designing the offense. But obviously, again, Sirianni is the head coach. But then how much of it is Jalen Hurts and what he likes? Because you look at some of the numbers from Kellen Moore in years past compared to this year, and there was a lot of play action under center in the past. There's a lot of motion. There's a lot of different things that some of that we saw in week one, but really haven't seen a whole lot since. And you kind of wonder, okay, how much of this is like this is what Jalen Hurts wants, or they think Jalen Hurts can only do these certain things and he's limited. So there's kind of like a lot of questions here, and the lines are being blurred, which doesn't really help, and it just kind of
Mhm.
makes the discourse frustrating and confusing. Although it's the Eagles' own doing, so a lot of it's their own fault. I think Jalen Hurts. I've hope for him because I saw him play really well in training camp this year. That matters to me. He didn't really put the ball in harm's way. I've seen him go on long stretches of his career not putting the ball in harm's way. So I think that's within him somewhere. I'm thinking he can get over this turnover issue at some point. But it's almost like until I see it, it's hard to believe that it's just totally behind him. So there's other things beyond that. But I mean, again, that has to be the number one thing. Like the turnovers just have to stop.
I want to ask you sort of a non-Eagles question. I mean, what do you think of the NFC East, the muddled, mediocre mess that the NFC East appears to be?
I think the Commanders are legit. I think they're for real. I think they're going to regress a little bit because they've been so good offensively. But I think ultimately, like Jaden Daniels, he looks like the real deal. Kind of reminds me of how much of a sea change that CJ Stroud provided for the Texans last year. Like when you do find that quarterback, they can make a pretty big difference. It's not only just him, obviously, but he's the catalyst certainly for that. So I think the Commanders, unfortunately, um, again, I think they're going to fall off a little bit just because of how good they've been offensively. But if I'm not mistaken, I think they lead the league in points scored. like
Yeah,
they're
I just
oh,
look at I agree with you about the Commanders. It is just so very frustrating when I think about the Commanders from a Giants
mm,
perspective, because the Giants outplayed them in week 2. The Giants were
yeah.
the first team in NFL history
I watched that game.
to score 3 touchdowns, not give up a touchdown, and lose a game.
Hmm.
And the NFL's been around for a minute, but the simplistic explanation is if their place kicker doesn't get hurt on the first play of the game, they
Sure.
probably win that game. But you're absolutely right about the Commanders. Not even so much in terms of this year, but when you find that guy,
Mm-hmm.
when you find that guy, and he's not easy to find. It's one of the reasons
No.
why Daniel Jones. That's one of the reasons why Daniel Jones is still in New York. That guy is not easy to find. The Giants have been looking for that next guy. They've been looking for him for a couple of years, and either haven't been in position to or haven't found that next guy. And when you find that guy, you could put yourself in a situation where you're set up for 6, 7, 8, 10 years, of success. That's the thing that scares me about the Commanders, because they're not anywhere near as complete a roster as they're going to be. But I am enjoying watching the Cowboys implode.
Of course. Yeah. The best coverage of that, by the way, is over at bloggingtheboys.com with our good friend RJ Ochoa. He's really taking it well. Spoiler alert, he's actually not. But
it's I never ever mind watching Cowboys fans squirm, because when is the last time that the Cowboys won anything? And Cowboys fans still think that the Cowboys, and by extension the Cowboys fan base, is God's gift to the NFL.
Yeah. Yep.
So I never mind watching the Cowboys squirm.
Well, it's especially funny because they could see this coming a mile away. They didn't do anything.
Their own doing.
Yeah, they didn't do anything in the offseason. So they all knew this was going to happen probably.
Mm-hmm.
But, you talk yourself into the team anyway because, it's the offseason and football's here and you're excited and you don't want to be right about all the things you're worried about. But then they ultimately come to roost. And then Jerry Jones is shutting down radio hosts and threatening them.
That was just ridiculous and sad and pathetic and, nonsensical.
And then the Cowboys, by the way, who are they're 3-3 now here.
Mm-hmm.
They return from their bye to play the Niners, who they always lose to, and usually ugly, in San Francisco. The Falcons in Atlanta, and then the Eagles, and then the Texans, and then the Commanders, and then the Giants. So, could be a lot more losses on the way for them.
We can only hope. Anyway, let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up with this. I mean, how do you see Sunday's game unfolding? I mean, I look at this game. It's impossible for me to pick the New York Giants to win this game, because I keep looking at what I think are winnable games for the Giants, and they keep finding ways not to win games that should be winnable, especially when they're at MetLife Stadium. I look at the Eagles as the team that should be favored, the team that should probably win, but a team that's also vulnerable. But I have no faith that the Giants can actually do the things necessary to win the game. So that's where I'm at. I'm just curious where you're at and how you expect this to unfold.
Yeah, I don't really trust the Eagles, and I think it's impossible to do that. I brought up to you that in their last 8 games, when the Eagles have been favored, they are 1-7 against the spread. 1-7. And that includes last week against the Browns, where, again, they were 9.5-point favorites. Actually, I think it went down to 8.5 before the game. But regardless, they only won by 4. They did not cover. Didn't even come close to covering. So, I'm having a hard time saying the Eagles are just going to come in here and easy win and cover against the Giants. I would take the Eagles to win the game. I don't think they cover. I think it's on a last-second field goal. I think the line's down to 3. So I guess I'll say, it's a last-second field goal that puts them up 2 or 1.
I'll feel if it's a last-second field goal, as long as it's not from more than 60. The Giants seem to have a habit of Jake Elliott has beaten them in the last 6 or 7 years on that 61-yard field goal, I think. That's it right. Was.
Mm-hmm.
Graham Gano Their own kicker. Actually, the Giants have 2 kickers on their roster now who have beaten them on field goals of 60 or more yards.
Great.
Gano beat them, 8 or 9 years ago. And now Greg Joseph, who's
Wow.
replacing him, beat them on a 61-yard kick in 2022. So it's like, please make it from 40 some, at least make it a kick that you're supposed to make.
I do think Saquon, is primed to have a decent game here against the Giants defense that ranks tied for second most rushing yards per attempt in the NFL. And not telling people how to spend their money, but I was looking at the Saquon Barkley anytime touchdown odds today. They're at minus 160 when I saw it. Seems like a decent bet. I feel like the Eagles are probably going to want to get him in the end zone regardless of how the game is going. I feel like it could happen at some point. So certainly something to monitor. I do think it'll be a good game for him. I think they're going to lean into him against this team. I liked what I saw from the Giants against the Bengals defensively, obviously more so. I thought, they put up a good effort, and the Eagles are missing their starting left tackle, as are the Giants. So I think the Giants pass rush, which again, I said to you in our write-up exchange, something I've never had to worry about in a long time, pretty much since I think I've been writing about the team, the Eagles. The Giants pass rush has been nothing ever really to write home about. But that's different this year. So I do think that'll make the game interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is just frustrating from a Giants perspective these days because they give you, you, as Bill Parcells used to say, you are what your record says you are. But they give you indications that they could be better than they are, maybe should be better than they are, but then they still give you indications that they're still the Giants.
Yeah.
So anyway, Brandon, I appreciate the time. Folks, check out Bleeding Green Nation if you haven't already for all the Eagles perspective. And as I said to my readers at Big Blue View, please be nice. Please be nice over there. Represent Big Blue View nicely. Behave yourselves. So even if you don't want to, behave yourselves over there. Anyway, Brandon, thank you very, very much for the time. Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.